So, our next speaker is already here. He's a senior consultant for testing systems in Germany, a member of board of Robot Framework Foundation. Welcome to the stage, René.
Yeah, thank you. Just a brief introduction who I am. As mentioned, I'm from Germany. The data driver I introduce now is done in my free time, but I still want to mention my company because they pay my trip here. So I'm working with Imbus, so thank you for that. And I'm doing a lot of consulting in very many different companies, so I'm typically not part of the project, part of the improvement process. And yeah, since last year, I'm a member of the board. My customers are typical German customers, like we have insurance, banks, some healthcare companies, and also some automotive. And automotive, of course, doing embedded stuff, and banks doing some host stuff, and insurance sometimes hosts and x86. So it's a lot of very heterogeneous systems. What I had in the past with our customers was they have a lot of huge data-based tests. So customers that have, for example, in one test, something like 40 parameters, and iterating these or changing these parameters in more than 500 times is just a regular case. So it's not like we're clicking on this and then clicking to somewhere else, and that's two test cases. It's something like doing all the time the same stuff, but in very, very different situations. So the other thing is I really like Robot Framework, but Robot Framework supports data-driven not in a proper way for this amount of data. So these robot files are not the proper amount. So what we want to have is we want to maintain data in tables, maybe file-based, like CSV, TSV, whatever. That's one thing where Excel came in charge and can be used in testing. Please don't use it for test design. Seen this? And you could also imagine databases. And I want to have one test per combination. So what I don't want to have is a for loop, which is looping over all these data, and afterwards I have one test that does 500 things. So I have one test, one goal. You mentioned this yesterday, Luca, so this is very important also for reporting and statistics. And I want to write it very easily in Robot Framework. So I don't want to break with a procedure. So I have two stories to tell. The one thing is, what is data driver, how you use it. The other thing is, what happened to me and the open source system. So because before last Robocon, I was really not so into open source stuff. I used it a lot, but contributing was another thing. So just a thing about data-driven testing. So what I meant, it's a multiplication of test sequences by data combinations, and then you get a lot of test cases out. So this is the idea of data-driven testing. And we have here an example of how it works in Robot Framework. This easy example, I think it's also from you, Ismo, from the Robot Framework hands-on. And we have here something like a test suite. We have 8 test cases. We have 2 arguments, so different username and testing with passwords. And we test that here the login is denied. So how does it work in Robot Framework? Just a quick introduction for the people who don't know. What we can do in Robot Framework is we can use something which is called test template. So test template means we call a keyword, which is on the right side of this test template at the settings table. And this keyword is called for every test case that is in the test cases section. Therefore, we don't need to put in keywords within this test case, which is in the test case section. You could also use this stuff for dirty things, like overriding stuff and so on, but just imagine this is for data-driven testing. What's missing here is when we execute the invalid login, it just uses fixed data, like the demo and the empty for the password here. So what I next want to have, I want to have arguments here with the invalid login, like a user and a password. And then, of course, it should be handed over here. I see I made a mistake here, but imagine I would use it here. Then what I could do, I could just write my test case, and behind the test case, just write the argument this actual test case is working with. So When I execute this test case, it hands over the word demo to the user and the empty to the password, and that would appear in the same stuff, but of course with the arguments. And if you proceed with this idea, you can then write something like this, 3 lines. We have demo with an empty password, demo with foobar as password, and the empty username with a mode, which would be the right password in this case, as a password. And then this will result in 3 test cases. So these test cases are all the same sequence, but are different in data. So in the end, with our 8 combinations, it looks like this. Proper formattation, please do this, because then it's easier to read, you understand, you may modify this stuff here as well. But in the reality, we have something different. Let's just use a very, very easy example. I think yesterday we had VR here to asking who's traveling with train. I think everybody of you knows this app. Everybody else, just take this one to come to the airport. So what can you do? You can buy train tickets. So we have 5 different types of customers. Here we could have been adult, we could be children between 7 and 17, we could be pensioners, disabled, or we could be older than 70 years, where I don't know where the difference between pensioners and this is. And could you be both? And what is better? But let's imagine you have these 5 groups, then you have different zones you can test, and then we can have combinations of these. And these resulting in 4 different prices, depending on where you pay. Most time it's good just to pay electronically and never ask the bus driver, but that's the case. So this ends in one suite, 36 test cases, and because we can check the prices at the same time, just 6 arguments. So this would look like this here. I think from here it's readable. Maybe now from the back it's readable. It's okay-ish, but these are only 6 arguments, not 40. So you would like to have it a little bit better, and especially maintenance is here a little bit weird. So for example, if customer groups just gets a little bit longer, I started adding a lot of spaces here in the second column and started formatting again because I want to have a nice format and so on. So it's kind of a little bit improper way, I would say. So what we would like is this, or something similar. So please don't nail me on Microsoft Excel. It's just it's their tool, you know, which you can use. And here you can use also formula or something like this to calculate your expected results and access these things. So what we didn't want to do is didn't want to make a for loop over this Excel table, because then we had to make keywords like run keyword and continue on failure, because otherwise the first failure will break the full test. And we have to add statistics and so on, so it would be bad. And if you have different data tables, you have to create different for loops, which makes re-implementing the for loop every time you have different tests, so kind of pain. So you don't want to have this. So I didn't want to have this as well, and I was used to working with data tables from different products. So I went to Robocon in 2018, I went to Robocon in 2018 in the beginning, then Pekka was there in October in Germany, and we discussed this stuff. I discussed it with colleague, discussed it with Ismo. No real idea, I discussed with Pekka, this would be a nice feature. He said, okay, write a pull request. And I don't think so. It would be a nice feature, so I changed my opinion because he mentioned the listener API. And with the listener API, I can modify the test model, so I could do this. And so I start discussing with different people, and I asked him how to do this, and he helped me to do it. So here in yellow, 2 recommendations from my side. If you would like to have some feature, like a skip state, don't just say, I want this. Discuss this with different people and get other opinions, and maybe optimize your opinions or change your opinions based on the facts that other people bring into the discussion. So don't just be silent and implement something. Be active and talk. So what happened afterwards? I think in the night I started with a data driver, and in the morning I figured out how to create a test case. And so the next weeks I was kind of less sleeping, because hacking some stuff. And what it does, it uses the listener API to modify this model and adds test cases during runtime, and it had the ability to read CSV. By the way, big applause to Maria regarding this QR code. It was a very good idea. And it follows the robot framework syntax. So just a brief introduction how it works. When you have a test suite, you can just include these library, like their library data driver. There are optional configurations like Ismo showed also in this, the plugins. And when this test suite starts, there is a method which is called start suite. This happens after library import, but before the suite setup is done. And it hands over the suite object, so you get the suite as the data model you can directly modify and access of Robot Framework. And what I do in the start suite, I analyze my configuration and I load data readers. And I use the same idea of the plugin API like the Selenium library does, so you can just add new plugins for reading data from any kind of source. There are a few included, but you can add difference. So if we think about CSV, it just read the CSV, processes it, and just returns. So it's only one method in it, like get data from data source, and you return just a table of test case data. Then the data driver does all the magic and maybe filter these information based on tags, based on names, and then added these test cases into the data model, and then it's finished, and then you start running the test. So on time the suite setup starts, all these tests are in the data model. So, it just executes these test cases. And the good thing is you have it later also in the reports, like you would write it just in the code, and it does not do any different syntax here, except of you have to add this library. And the library is only active in these test suites which has these library included. So all your other tests are just working like normal. So what I did do it on my own. I have it on my computer, this stuff, and then I went to Robocon 2019, and I went to sprints, and I had no clue how to do stuff on GitHub. So I had a GitHub account, but I have never done a project. So I mentioned this, and Luca, thank you very much for this, showed me how to do everything on GitHub, branch, fork, make pull requests, and then I just open sourced it, and I said, okay, here it is. And I discussed other ideas like these plugin API. And while 2019, I got pull requests from Ed, thank you for this, Ed, because I had no clue how to do a setup pie and how to do PyPy. And he just had an initial idea of, hey, here, this is a setup pie, just use it. And then I looked at a few YouTube videos and understood how PyPy works, and I put it to PyPy, and there was a name was free, so that was it when it just made pip install possible. And then I was completely shocked in the year that there was users asking questions about this and liked it. So I didn't calculate this from the beginning. So and then I got pull requests and I got ideas. So somebody asked, so hey, what about Pabot? And Pabot normally use Robot Framework API, but Robot Framework does not know that there are enough test cases before creating them. So it's kind of an issue working these test level directly announcement. So we just put our heads together and found out an idea how we could generically use Pabot also with test level split with the data driver. So that was also quite good. So my recommendations here on this side is, of course, join the community. So I don't have to tell you guys, but everybody who's on YouTube or something like this, so come to Slack, ask people, join our community, be active. And with being active, I mean, do not only go shopping. I think we have 6,500 people on Slack. We have something like 200 to 400 people who are active, and we have something like 50 people who are really active and also giving answers. And I would say, please give answers if you know something. When you're a beginner, you are in the newbies channel, you will learn something. Once you learn something, just give answers in the newbies channel because you learned it already. So please help other members when you know something. So how DataDriver works is it imports the library, and I think in this case I can show it a little bit. This is a syntax what you have to do. So there are two limitations here. The keyword itself needs to be in the same suite. I would recommend it totally always, because when you read a test suite that is data-driven, you always want to know what is the sequence of the test. So I would always say, from a just consulting point of view, write your test sequence, like here, open single ticket page, and then check for prices. This should be directly below your data combinations, because then the people understand the test suite. If it's somewhere down in the resources and you have to dig for it, what the test is doing, it makes no fun to understand this. So this is a limitation. It has to be local, because otherwise I had no direct access to the names of these arguments here. And then you have one test case. You may add variables into the test cases. This is now also a new feature in Robot Framework 3.2, what I'm not using, because when you have here these variable names, it just replaces these names with the actual variables from the actual test case so that you get unique names in the test cases. You don't have to use this. You can just give names in the data source, then the names from the data source are used, so from the Excel table. And these are just dummy data. They will be deleted, but if the data driver cannot be loaded because it's not installed on your test environment, it does not just throw exceptions and your test break, then it will work with just this template test. So, for example, you could have here your kind of smoke test, just there, one combination, this is working, but if you want to have an expanding stuff, you use the data driver file. And also if the file is not found, you will also use this one. Okay, and this is how the default syntax looks like. So we have first column like test cases, also tasks are working on RPA. You have then the variable names in the top. In the moment, only scalar variables are accepted, but I would ask for people having ideas how to, for example, implement dictionaries, and lists are pretty easy, but I didn't do it in the moment. And then we could add tags and documentation, because you want to maybe filter on tags on specific test cases later. So let's have a look how it actually works. Is it readable from the size? In the back? Good. So this is how it would look like normally. And you see it's kind of not that good readable. And here we have this robot thing. We have here the two options. On the one hand, I define the file. You don't have to define the file. If you just put a same naming CSV file to the same folder, like the suite's name, it just works out of it. Typical CSV encoding is CP1252 because it's Excel, and so European stuff with semicolon as a separator, not the comma, but you can modify this at the encodings as well. And I have also these encodings for US or Linux just built in that you just can say, okay, it's CSV behavior US or something like this. And then the page is opened, then the test template is named, check prices, and that is duplicated, and then we close all browsers. Okay, when I execute this, and I will do a dry run on the full suite, so we have both the old style and the data-driven style. It's just done. Let's go to our logs. And okay, that's it. And you see in the logs, we have 70 test cases in the raw, which means this is the full written lines, and the other one is the data-driven thing. It's the same amount of test case, so it works the same. And the only thing what we see is the data driver took a little bit longer. So in this case, it was 35 elements, something like 200 milliseconds longer. I have some performance tests with 10,000 lines and creating 10,000 test cases. It took on my machine something like 40 seconds to create these, but I think a lot of this stuff is also based on Robot Framework, and reading these out of the robot files is also not very much faster. So there are some performance difference, but it should not be that issue. And as you see here, so we have all our test cases in our raw file, and the same look in the data-driven stuff. So this is absolutely normal. You don't see here any difference in your logs. So what we now can do, we can also do, one moment there, we can also do some filtering. For example, what I do here is, I say, okay, include smoke. So this is the tag I added to 7 or so tests. And let me just check something. Let's build in a mistake. And then we run this one. And while this runs, I can answer one question. Is there one question? Just a brief one? Not yet?
Hey, René, you said the test driver fails. So if in the case you have the test driver library import fails,
yes,
it does it as if it's like a smoke test and whatever in the one case. Is there a way to set that up so that you can almost run it at runtime, have a condition saying, I want to run what's here or what's in that file? Can you make it dynamic at runtime?
So dynamic to generally not include in the data driver or something like this?
To change the data set.
So what you could do is just not use the file. Then you will see an information that data could not be loaded and the one test is executed. But I think it could be an easy option, like you hand over a Boolean argument, run or do not run, something like this. So this could be a possibility, yes. But in the moment, it's not implemented. So what we have here now is we have one bug. So the first test case fails. And as you see, we don't have to make any extra things for continue on failure or something like this. It's just robot framework behavior. So if this test fails, it makes a test teardown and then starts with the next test. What we could also do, what is a little bit tricky, the rerun on failed, because robot framework can use the old run to see where the fails is and only rerun the failing test and then merge both results. But for this, robot framework should be able to directly access these tests. So we had the workaround for this as well. There is this pre-run modifier. By the way, you can use this pre-run modifier also for all your not data-driven tests. So it does pretty the same thing that directly the command ---- rerun on failed. So what you do here is you do a pre-run modifier at this situation, and then it's also built in data driver. So datadriver.rerun failed, and then column and the path to your old result where the failing tests are named. And when I just execute this one, it should execute only one test. By the way, it fails again. I didn't change the data. So let's do this. Just change this one. And then rerun the failed one again. And now it passed. And then you can merge. Where is it? The rebot. Yes. Yes. So as you see here, then I merge the original output with the rerun XML. And after this, I get a new log. And I have all tests passed. So also these possibilities of modifying the tests are available. You can also just say, I directly want to execute the check price as mobility impaired in BC by just calling the name. So you just have to announce a global variable, same what Mikko does when he uses pabot on test level split. So the most thing you can do with robot framework, you can also do with data driver here as well. Okay. Then I'm nearly finished. I just jumped through the features. So we have in the moment built in the CSV specific format. We have a generic CSV driver which Marcus requested, and you should now use it. And which is just table has to have the name, no test case needed, nothing else. We have the Excel data reader, but be careful with Excel because Excel has typed data. So you could have a timestamp column there or a float column. And when you call it from the Excel API, float is just a float number. When you convert it to a string, it gets a dot notation, and which European have a comma typically. So it would just get another string. So when you use Excel files, please be careful and say that this formattation is text. And Excel has no proper versioning, so CSV or something like this is better. Pict is a kind of cool tool for pairwise combinatory testing. And this is very recommended if you say you have 50 options here and 30 options there and 20 options there, and please give me a valid combination of all. You can use Pict, and you can just give data driver the Pict model files like here, and it will generate the expansions of this stuff. Pict is open source MIT license from Microsoft, and you can also just make it on a Mac or Linux. So just download it, just make pig, and then you have it, and you put it to path, and it works. And the very important and last thing, I think, is you can add custom readers. So you just have to inherit a class there, same like the Selenium data plugins are. You have to implement one class, like get data from reader, from data source, and then you can implement your same readers. So I think Robin there implemented a reader for some database, so he has some test models in the database, huge, complex, I don't know, whatever, and it just fetches these information from the database and creates the test. So you're completely free where the data are coming from, so you can imagine also databases where you really maintain your tests. So the rest I already explained, it's just for documentation, and the last things for the questions, please participate the community, ask for help, but also please read the manual. So Pekka did so pretty awesome job for the user guide. So the user guide is really good, so please read the manual. Don't be lazy, watch videos. There are also online trainings that cost, I don't know, $10, or if YouTube is not enough, but give it back. So participate, help newbies, and maybe open source your stuff again. We had always these questions, like also these image library from last year. It wasn't open source yet, but it's now, and this is quite good because other people can contribute. Other people can also improve your library. So my stuff improved a lot by the work of other people. And also ask if you are able to contribute to other projects. Also here, first read the fucking manual, then ask the people, and please discuss your ideas with the people. So also, I contributed to Selenium, and I think I did 10 times ping pong with Tatu, like discussion about the idea how to do it, what's the best way and what not, and change your mind. And yeah, don't just make pull requests, also ask what do you think is the best behavior or where to implement this. So at this situation, or here I'm finished. I have, I think, a little bit time.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So we have few minutes for questions. Anyone there? Jani.
Hi. The data passing from the data library, is it like passing a full copy of, can it use like a generators?
So the data reader gets just a config object, and the config object has quarks on the other end, so that you can have any kind of options you pass to your reader, like credentials or IP address of the database. It's the one way. And on the other way, I prepared an object that has a test case name, arguments. It's just a list of arguments with a dictionary. No, it's a dictionary like argument name and the value, so you can put in also functions or whatever is the value of the argument, and tags, list, and documentation. So I think you can also put something, functions, Python, whatever, back to the test. Yeah.
Hello. On the beginning, you said you can't use for loop, but using for loop with template, it can be maybe.
I can use for loop, but it's bad. So of course, data reader does also for loops, so I have no problem with for loops itself, but they're pretty awesome. But for loops within my test is super bad behavior, and for loops within a keyword is okay, but still is one test case for 500 data combinations, and I want to have 500 test cases.
But for loop, it's possible use with template.
You can make a for loop in the template, or what do you want to say?
Yeah, something like that. And
but still, you have one test case.
Yes.
You have one test case and then 500 combinations in this one test case, but yes. I want the statistic of 500 test cases.
Use data structure, dictionary or JSON for input.
Still, you would have one test case.
Yes.
And I don't want this. So because one test, it's not testing one thing, it's testing 500 different things. So I want have 500 different test cases because it has a test case setup and a test case teardown, and it has test case documentation and test case tags, and be non-critical and critical. And this is how robot framework thinks and behaves. So, in my opinion, and this is also my recommendation to customers, test one thing in one test case and not 500 things in one test case. I think here in the front are other questions.
All right, I think we are out of time. Thank you, René.
So just come to me.